Isabella Ricci discovered her husband's affair the way most modern betrayals are revealed. Not through lipstick on a collar or a suspicious phone call, but through the cold, clinical precision of a misplaced email notification. It was a Thursday morning in October, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes London feel almost romantic. She was sitting at her kitchen counter, espresso in hand, reviewing the menu for an upcoming charity gala at her restaurant. Her phone buzzed. Giovanni's laptop, carelessly left open on the table, had synced a new email. The subject line glowed on the screen like a neon sign in the fog. Flight and hotel confirmation for Giovanni Moretti and Lucia Bianchi. Lucia Bianchi. The name hit her like a punch to the sternum. Isabella knew Lucia, Giovanni's colleague, the architect he'd worked with on that Milan project 2 years ago. The woman with the perfect smile and the effortless Italian elegance that made Isabella feel like a workhorse in comparison. She'd met her at a few work functions, always friendly, always professional. Isabella had never felt threatened. Why would she? Giovanni had always been so transparent about his work, his colleagues, his life. Or so she thought. She clicked on the email with trembling fingers, her chef's hands, usually so steady when wielding a knife, suddenly clumsy. The details materialized before her like ingredients in a recipe she never wanted to cook. First-class tickets to Venice, a suite at the Greedy Palace overlooking the Grand Canal, reservations at Ristorante Quadri. Venice. Their Venice. The city they'd been promising to visit together for 7 years. The city where Giovanni had proposed they'd renew their vows on their 10th anniversary. Wait, before we tell you what happened next in Venice, we need to know something. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Like you're playing a supporting role in a story that's supposed to be yours? If that feeling just hit you in the chest, if you've ever been betrayed, overlooked, or underestimated, then you need to subscribe right now. Because what Isabella did next? It changed everything. And the women who follow this channel? We don't stay invisible. We don't stay silent. We reclaim our power. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to stop being the victim in someone else's narrative and become the author of your own story. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Except their 10th anniversary was still 2 years away, and apparently, Giovanni couldn't wait that long to see the floating city. Just not with her. The email detailed a 4-day romantic escape disguised as a professional conference. There was even a note about a private gondola ride and tickets to La Fenice Opera House. Her husband, the man who claimed he was too busy to take a weekend off with her, had orchestrated an entire Venetian love affair with his ex-girlfriend. Isabella didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't throw his laptop across the room, though God knows she wanted to. Instead, something cold and calculating settled over her. The same focused intensity she brought to her kitchen when a dish wasn't working and needed to be completely reimagined. Isabella Ricci had built one of London's most respected restaurants from nothing. She'd earned a Michelin star through precision, creativity, and an unwavering refusal to accept anything less than perfection. She'd spent 15 years turning raw ingredients into extraordinary experiences, crafting narratives on plates that made people weep with joy. And if there was one thing she knew how to do, it was take something bitter and transform it into something unforgettable. Giovanni thought he could rewrite their story, casting her as the oblivious wife while he played the romantic lead with someone else. But he forgot one crucial detail. Isabella was the chef. She controlled the menu. and she was about to serve him a dish he'd never forget. Venice wasn't going to be his romantic escape. It was going to be her stage. And by the time she was finished, everyone would know exactly what kind of man Giovanni Moretti really was. Isabella spent the next 3 days moving through her restaurant like a ghost, her hands performing the familiar rituals of her craft, while her mind dissected 7 years of marriage with surgical precision. The signs had been there all along, hadn't they? She'd just been too busy perfecting her beurre blanc to notice. Giovanni's late nights had started 18 months ago. The business trips that multiplied like weeds. The way he'd stopped asking about her day, stopped tasting her experimental dishes, stopped looking at her with anything resembling desire. She'd attributed it to stress, to the demands of his architectural firm, to the natural evolution of a long marriage. What a fool she'd been. She began her investigation the way she approached any complex recipe, methodically, layer by layer. Social media revealed little. Lucia was careful. Her Instagram a curated gallery of architectural photography and artfully arranged aperitivos. But LinkedIn told a different story. Lucia and Giovanni had collaborated on 5 projects in the past 2 years, not just the one he'd mentioned. 5 projects that required site visits and client meetings in Milan, Rome, and Florence. Then Isabella found the photograph. It was buried in the comments of a mutual colleague's post from 6 months ago, a group shot from some architecture conference in Barcelona. Giovanni and Lucia stood slightly apart from the others, but Isabella recognized the body language immediately. The way his hand hovered near the small of her back, the way she leaned into his space, the intimate smile they shared, as if they were the only 2 people in the room. Her hands shook as she scrolled further, and that's when she saw the name in Lucia's tagged photos that made her blood run cold. Marco Ricci. Her baby brother. Her brilliant, naive, 28-year-old brother who worked in finance and still called her for advice about everything from investments to relationships. The photos were recent, from the past 4 months. Marco and Lucia at a wine bar in Shoreditch. Marco and Lucia at a gallery opening in Mayfair. Marco's arm around her shoulders, his face lit with the kind of happiness that made Isabella's chest ache. She called him immediately, her voice steady despite the rage building in her throat. "Marco, tell me about Lucia." The enthusiasm in his voice was devastating. He'd met her at a networking event. She was brilliant, sophisticated, shared his love of modern art. They'd been seeing each other for 3 months. He thought she might be the one. Isabella closed her eyes. Her brother had no idea he was dating her husband's mistress. The betrayal had metastasized, spreading through her family like poison. That night, alone in her kitchen, Isabella opened a bottle of Barolo and let the plan crystallize. She wouldn't confront Giovanni in their London flat with tears and accusations. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of a private dissolution. No. She would take this to Venice, to the stage he'd set for his romantic fantasy. She would bring Marco, expose the web of lies in front of everyone who mattered in Giovanni's professional world, and she would do it with the same precision and artistry she brought to every dish she'd ever created. Revenge, she decided, was best served in public. Isabella woke the next morning with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. The fog of denial had lifted, replaced by something sharper, more dangerous. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, studying the woman reflected back at her. Somewhere along the way, she'd become invisible, even to herself. That ended today. She spent the morning researching Venice with the same intensity she'd once devoted to mastering French technique at Le Cordon Bleu. The Venetian Architecture Gala was in 3 weeks, a prestigious event that drew the elite of the European design world. Giovanni had mentioned it months ago, claiming he couldn't attend due to scheduling conflicts. Another lie to add to the collection. The gala was held at the Palazzo Ducale, a venue dripping with history and grandeur. Perfect. Isabella pulled up the guest list through a contact at a luxury hospitality group she'd worked with. Her eyes scanned the names. Architects, designers, critics, potential clients worth millions. Giovanni's entire professional network would be there, watching. Even better. She picked up her phone and called Marco. "Can you come to the restaurant tonight? After closing. Come alone." He arrived at midnight, his tie loosened, confusion etched across his features. Isabella poured them both a generous measure of whiskey and slid her laptop across the counter. "I need you to look at something." She watched his face as he scrolled through the evidence she'd compiled, the emails, the flight confirmations, the photographs of Giovanni and Lucia spanning 2 years. His expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something darker. When he finally looked up, his voice was hollow. "How long have you known?" 5 days. "Marco, there's more." She pulled up the photos of him and Lucia together. "She's been playing both of us." The glass in his hand trembled. For a moment, Isabella thought he might shatter it against the wall. Instead, he set it down carefully, his jaw clenched. "What do you want to do?" "I want to go to Venice, to the gala. I want to walk into that palazzo with you on my arm and show them exactly who they've been betraying." She leaned forward, her voice steady. "I want everyone in that room to know what kind of man Giovanni Moretti is, what kind of woman Lucia Bianchi is. I want their reputations in ruins." Marco was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the counter, a nervous habit from childhood. Then something shifted in his expression, a hardness settling into features that had always been too gentle. "When do we leave?" 3 weeks. I'll handle the arrangements." Isabella opened her laptop and began typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard. 2 first-class tickets to Venice, a suite at the Bauer Palazzo, close enough to the greedy palace that they might cross paths in the narrow streets. She entered her credit card information without hesitation. The confirmation email arrived instantly, and Isabella felt something unlock in her chest. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about reclaiming the narrative of her own life, about refusing to be written out of her own story. Giovanni had tried to make her disappear, to reduce her to a footnote in his grand romance. He was about to learn that Isabella Ricci had never been anyone's footnote. She was the main course, and she was about to serve him the most unforgettable meal of his life. Venice rose from the lagoon like a fever dream, all golden light and impossible architecture. Isabella stood on the deck of the water taxi, her hair whipping in the salt-tinged wind, and felt something ancient stir in her chest. This city had waited 7 years for her. It could wait 3 more days. She'd insisted that Marco arrive separately, taking an earlier flight to avoid suspicion. They couldn't risk Giovanni spotting them together at the airport. Isabella checked into the Bauer Palazzo alone, her luggage containing 3 carefully selected outfits and a single photograph. Her wedding day. Giovanni's hand on her waist, his eyes full of promises he'd already begun breaking. Her suite overlooked a quiet canal, far from the Grand Canal's tourist chaos. She unpacked methodically, hanging each garment with the precision she brought to plating a dish. The gown for the gala was midnight blue, elegant and understated, the kind of dress that whispered power rather than screamed it. She'd chosen it specifically because Giovanni had once told her blue washed her out. He'd been wrong about so many things. That evening, Isabella walked the narrow streets alone, letting Venice seep into her bones. She passed the gritty palace and allowed herself a moment of bitter satisfaction. Somewhere in that gilded building, Giovanni and Lucia were probably tangled in Egyptian cotton sheets, congratulating themselves on their cleverness. They had no idea the trap was already closing. She stopped at a small Baccaro near the Rialto, ordering cicchetti and a glass of Prosecco. The owner, a weathered man named Stefano, recognized the way she examined each bite, the professional assessment of someone who understood food as language. They fell into easy conversation, Italian flowing between them like water through the canals. When she mentioned the gala, his eyes lit up. His nephew was one of the event coordinators. Within an hour, Isabella had secured not just entry for herself and Marco, but a prime table near the central dais where the evening's presentations would take place. She'd also learned the names of 3 major clients Giovanni was courting, including a Dubai developer considering a €50 million project. Walking back to her hotel, Isabella felt the final pieces sliding into place. This city that was supposed to represent her romantic dreams had become something better, a stage for her resurrection. Giovanni had tried to erase her, to rewrite their story with Lucia as the leading lady. But he'd forgotten that Isabella had spent her entire career transforming raw ingredients into art, taking the bitter and making it sublime. She texted Marco, "Tomorrow night, stay ready." His response came immediately, "I was born ready." Isabella smiled, standing on the Accademia Bridge as the sun set over the Grand Canal, painting everything in shades of gold and blood orange. Venice had always been a city of masks, of hidden identities and secret passages. How fitting that it would be here, in this labyrinth of beauty and deception, that she would finally reveal the truth. She was no longer the invisible wife. She was the author of this story now, and the final chapter was about to begin. The Palazzo Ducale glittered like a jewel box under the Venetian night sky, its Gothic arches illuminated by hundreds of carefully placed lights. Water taxis deposited guests along the private dock, each arrival more spectacular than the last. Isabella watched from the shadows of the colonnade as Giovanni and Lucia stepped onto the red carpet, his hand possessively placed at the small of her back. Lucia wore crimson, bold, attention-seeking, the color of a woman who believed she'd already won. Giovanni looked exactly as he always did at these events, impeccably tailored, confident, his smile easy and practiced. They moved through the entrance like royalty, accepting champagne from passing waiters, completely unaware that the ground beneath them was about to crack open. Isabella waited exactly 7 minutes, long enough for them to settle into their false sense of security, long enough for the crowd to thicken. Then she nodded to Marco, who offered his arm with a grim smile that didn't reach his eyes. They entered together, and Isabella felt the shift in the room's energy immediately. Heads turned. Conversations paused mid-sentence. She'd chosen her dress perfectly. The midnight blue silk caught the light with every step, elegant and devastating. Her hair was swept up, exposing the diamond earrings Giovanni had given her on their 5th anniversary. She wore them like weapons. Marco, in his perfectly cut tuxedo, looked every inch the successful financier he was. Together they were striking, a handsome couple that commanded attention without demanding it. Isabella's eyes found Giovanni across the crowded salon. She watched the exact moment he registered her presence. His champagne flute froze halfway to his lips. The color drained from his face as if someone had pulled a plug. Beside him, Lucia was still laughing at something an older architect had said, oblivious. Isabella held Giovanni's gaze for 3 long seconds, her expression serene, almost pleasant. Then she smiled, not the warm smile of a forgiving wife, but something colder, sharper, a promise. She turned away first, letting him stew in his panic. "Isabella Ricci!" A woman in emerald green approached, her face bright with recognition. "I dined at your restaurant last month. The sea bass was transcendent." "How kind of you to say." Isabella's voice was warm, professional, betraying nothing of the calculated fury beneath her composure. "Are you enjoying Venice?" The conversation flowed easily. More people gravitated toward her. A food critic from Milan, a restaurateur from Paris, even one of the gala's sponsors who'd heard of her Michelin star. Isabella worked the room like she worked her kitchen, with precision, timing, and an innate understanding of how to build toward a perfect crescendo. From the corner of her eye, she tracked Giovanni's movements. He'd pulled Lucia aside, whispering urgently in her ear. Lucia's head snapped toward Isabella, her expression shifting from confusion to something like fear. Marco appeared at Isabella's elbow with fresh champagne. "He's panicking," he murmured. "Good." Isabella accepted the glass, her hand steady. Let him wonder. Let him imagine every possible scenario. The not knowing is half the punishment. She caught sight of the Dubai developer Stefano had mentioned, holding court near the central dais. Perfect. Isabella touched Marco's arm. "It's time." The moment arrived during the keynote presentation, when the room's attention was focused on the stage and the champagne had loosened tongues and lowered guards. Isabella had positioned herself near the Dubai developer, a silver-haired man named Rashid Al-Mansouri, who was discussing the importance of integrity in architectural partnerships. "Integrity," Isabella said, her voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of the surrounding circle. Such a fascinating concept in professional relationships. I've always believed that how a person conducts themselves in private reveals everything about how they'll behave in business. Rashid nodded thoughtfully. Precisely. Trust is the foundation of any successful collaboration. And betrayal? Isabella's smile was elegant, dangerous. What does that reveal? The question hung in the air like smoke. Several people in their circle shifted, sensing something beneath the surface. Marco stood beside her, his presence solid and supportive. Giovanni materialized at her elbow, his cologne too strong, his smile too tight. "Isabella, what a surprise. I didn't know you were in Venice." "Didn't you?" She turned to face him fully, her expression serene. "How strange. I would have thought Lucia might have mentioned it. You two seem to share everything else." The color drained from his face. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately." "Why?" Isabella's voice remained conversational, but it cut like a blade. "We're among friends, aren't we? Colleagues. People who value honesty and transparency." She turned back to Rashid and the growing audience. "My husband and I were supposed to visit Venice together. For years we planned it, our dream destination. But then I discovered something interesting. He'd already booked the trip. First-class tickets, suite at the Greedy Palace, private gondola rides. Everything we'd discussed." Giovanni's hand gripped her arm. "Isabella, please." She shook him off effortlessly. The only problem was that the confirmation email listed 2 passengers, Giovanni Moretti and Lucia Bianchi. She gestured across the room to where Lucia stood frozen, her crimson dress suddenly looking like a target. His colleague, his ex-girlfriend, and, as it happens, my brother's current girlfriend. The gasps rippled through the crowd like a stone thrown into still water. Phones appeared, discreetly angled to capture the unfolding drama. Giovanni's face had gone from pale to crimson. "This is a misunderstanding," he started. "Is it?" Isabella's voice remained calm, almost clinical. The email was quite detailed. 4 days, the opera, Ristorante Quadri. Tell me, Giovanni, which part did I misunderstand? The part where you lied to me about being too busy to travel? Or the part where your mistress has been sleeping with my brother while planning romantic getaways with my husband? Rashid al-Mansouri stepped back, his expression hardening. Others in the circle did the same, creating a widening space around Giovanni, as if his dishonesty might be contagious. "You see," Isabella continued, addressing the crowd now, "I've learned that betrayal in personal life is never isolated. A man who lies to his wife, who deceives his family, who manipulates the people who trust him most, that man will betray anyone. In business, in partnerships, in million-euro contracts." Giovanni's carefully constructed world was crumbling, and everyone was watching. Lucia pushed through the crowd, her crimson dress a slash of color against the palazzo's gilded interior. Her face was contorted with fury, but Isabella noticed the fear beneath it, the dawning realization that everything was unraveling. "You have no right!" "No right?" Marco's voice cut through the murmurs, cold and precise. "You've been sleeping with my sister's husband while dating me. Tell me, Lucia, which one of us was the main course and which was the side dish?" The crowd's shock deepened. Phones were no longer discreet. Dozens of devices captured every moment, every expression. This would be on architecture blogs by morning, in industry newsletters by afternoon. Giovanni's reputation was being dismantled in real time, brick by carefully laid brick. Giovanni tried to salvage something, anything. "Everyone, please. This is a private matter that's been taken out of context." Context. Isabella's laugh was soft, devastating. "Let me provide some context then. For 2 years, my husband told me he was too exhausted for date nights because of work stress, too busy for the weekend trips we used to take, too tired to even ask about my day." She paused, letting her words settle over the crowd. Meanwhile, he was booking romantic getaways with his ex-girlfriend, attending conferences that didn't exist, creating an entire second life, while making me feel like I was demanding too much by simply wanting to be seen. Her voice didn't rise, didn't crack. That was what made it so powerful. The absolute control, the surgical precision of each word. He made me feel invisible in my own marriage. Convinced me that my expectations were unreasonable, that my need for connection was neediness. That's what betrayal really looks like. Not just the affair, but the systematic erosion of your reality, the gaslighting, the casual cruelty of being made to feel like you're asking for too much when all you want is basic human decency. Rashid al-Mansouri's expression had shifted from shock to something harder. He turned to Giovanni. "The Al-Noor Tower project. We were going to sign next week." The past tense hung in the air like a death knell. Giovanni's mask finally shattered. "You're destroying my career over a personal matter." "You destroyed your career," Isabella corrected, her voice still maddeningly calm. "I'm simply making sure everyone knows who they're really doing business with. A man who lies, who manipulates, who lacks the basic integrity to honor his commitments." She turned to address the crowd one final time. "I came to Venice because it was supposed to be ours, our dream. And I'll be damned if I let him steal that from me too. So here I am, reclaiming what's mine. Not him, God no, but my story, my narrative, my power." Marco moved to her side, his hand finding hers. Across the room, Lucia had gone pale. Her earlier bravado evaporated. Giovanni stood alone in the center of a widening circle, his carefully constructed facade in ruins. Isabella felt nothing but clarity. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about refusing to disappear, about standing in the light and demanding to be seen. She'd spent years making herself smaller to accommodate his ego. Those years were over. The videos went viral within hours. By morning, Giovanni's phone was flooded with calls from clients requesting clarification, which was corporate speak for cancellation. The Al Noor Tower project evaporated. 2 other contracts were quietly suspended pending review. The architecture community was small, insular, and unforgiving, especially when betrayal was served with such public spectacle. Giovanni showed up at Isabella's hotel suite at dawn, disheveled and desperate. She opened the door in her robe, coffee in hand, looking more rested than she had in months. "We can fix this," he said, his voice hoarse. "Couples therapy. A fresh start. I'll do whatever it takes." Isabella studied him with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. This man had shared her bed for 7 years, and yet standing before her now, he felt like a stranger. "You're not here to save our marriage, Giovanni. You're here to save your reputation. There's a difference." "Isabella, please." "The divorce papers will be couriered to your office next week. I'm keeping the restaurant, the London flat, and my dignity. You can keep Lucia, though I suspect she's already moved on." Isabella paused. "She left Venice on the first flight out this morning, by the way. Didn't even check out properly." She closed the door on his protest, feeling nothing but relief. Lucia's fall was equally swift. Marco had forwarded their text exchanges to her employer, messages that revealed she'd been billing personal trips as business expenses, using company resources for her affairs. Her resignation was tendered within 48 hours, though resignation was a generous term for what was clearly a forced exit. Marco arrived at Isabella's suite that afternoon with pastries from a nearby bakery and a bottle of Prosecco. They sat on her balcony overlooking the canal, the autumn sun warm on their faces. "I can't believe I didn't see it," Marco said quietly. "All the signs were there." "We see what we want to see, what we're conditioned to see." Isabella broke off a piece of cornetto, savoring the buttery layers. "They counted on that, on our trust, our love, our willingness to give them the benefit of the doubt. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you more, before all this." Isabella reached over and squeezed his hand. "You're here now. That's what matters." They spent the next 3 days exploring Venice together, not as co-conspirators in revenge, but as siblings rediscovering each other. They wandered through hidden courtyards, ate at tiny trattorias where tourists never ventured, and talked about everything except Giovanni and Lucia. On their last evening, standing on the Rialto Bridge as the sun set over the Grand Canal, Marco turned to her. What happens now? When we go back to London? Isabella smiled, and for the first time in weeks, it reached her eyes. I live. Properly this time. No more making myself smaller. No more invisible wife. She looked out at the city that had witnessed her resurrection. I take up space. I demand to be seen. And I never, ever apologize for it again. London greeted Isabella with rain and gray skies, but she'd never found the city more beautiful. She returned to her restaurant with fresh eyes, seeing it not as the place she'd hidden while her marriage crumbled, but as a testament to everything she'd built with her own hands, her own vision, her own relentless pursuit of excellence. Her staff noticed the change immediately. There was a lightness to her now, a confidence that radiated from her like heat from a kitchen. She moved through the dining room during service with her head high, stopping at tables to discuss dishes, accepting compliments with grace instead of deflecting them as she once had. The divorce proceedings were swift and clinical. Giovanni didn't contest anything. He couldn't afford the additional publicity. Isabella signed the papers in her lawyer's office on a Tuesday afternoon, then went directly to a property viewing in Shoreditch. The space was raw and imperfect, exposed brick, high ceilings, industrial bones that needed vision to transform into something extraordinary. Isabella stood in the center of the empty room and saw it all. Intimate tables, an open kitchen where diners could watch the alchemy of cooking, a menu that celebrated boldness and authenticity over safe, predictable choices. She signed the lease that evening. The new restaurant concept consumed her in the best possible way. She called it reclaim, a single word that carried the weight of her entire journey. The menu would be unapologetically ambitious, dishes that demanded attention and refused to be ignored. No more playing it safe. No more making herself palatable to please others. Marco invested in the venture, becoming her business partner. They worked late into the night, planning, designing, arguing over details with the passionate intensity of two people who'd learned that life was too short for compromise. 3 months after Venice, Isabella stood in the completed space during a soft opening, watching her team move with practiced precision. A food critic from The Guardian sat at table 7, her expression unreadable as she tasted the signature dish, a deconstructed ossobuco that honored tradition while completely reimagining it. Isabella's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photo of Giovanni's LinkedIn profile, updated with a new position at a significantly smaller firm in Manchester. She deleted it without responding. He was no longer her concern, no longer even a footnote in her story. That night, alone in her flat with a glass of wine and the city lights spread before her, Isabella reflected on the woman she'd been 6 months ago. Small, invisible, apologetic for taking up space. That woman felt like a stranger now. She'd learned that betrayal could be a gift if you let it. It had shattered her illusions, yes, but it had also freed her from a life half-lived, from a marriage that required her diminishment to function. Romance held no appeal. She'd spent enough years defining herself through someone else's gaze. Now, she was interested in her own reflection, in discovering who Isabella Ricci was when she wasn't performing the role of devoted wife. The future stretched before her, vast and unwritten. She would fill it with her own ambitions, her own dreams, her own unapologetic presence. She was no longer invisible. She never would be again.